Most people think samurai were noble warriors who lived by honor. But behind the armor and the katana lies a much stranger truth. Here are 10 things you didn't know about the samurai. Forget the Hollywood version. Real samurai weren't always loyal. They didn't always fight with swords. And their code of honor? Let's just say, it had some loopholes. Let's dive in. Number 10. They weren't always elite warriors. Early samurai were basically hired thugs. They were landowners who used force to protect their property. Some were little more than glorified bodyguards. It wasn't until centuries later that they became a respected warrior class. So much for the noble origin story. Number 9. The katana wasn't their main weapon. You think of a samurai, you picture a katana. But that was actually a backup weapon. Their real go-to on the battlefield. The bow. Samurai were expert archers on horseback. In fact, early samurai warfare looked more like Mongol combat than sword duels. They had an official license to kill. Samurai had the legal right to kill commoners. If a peasant disrespected them, even by accident, they could draw their sword. No trial, no consequences. This was called kirisute gomen, or authorization to cut and leave. Abuse of this power led to obvious problems. Many were not Japanese. Some of the most famous samurai weren't Japanese at all. Yasuke was an African man who served under the legendary warlord Oda Nobunaga. He was a foreigner, a former slave. And yet, he rose through the ranks to become a samurai. Proof that the sword didn't care where you came from, only how well you could use it. They had their own fashion rules. Samurai weren't just soldiers, they were trendsetters. There were strict rules on how they could wear their hair, walk, and even dress. For example, they wore 2 swords, daisho, to symbolize their rank, and their hairstyles? Shaved on top with a ponytail. Not for style, it helped their helmets fit tighter in battle. Women could be samurai too. Meet the Onabugeisha, elite female warriors trained in combat. They defended castles, led armies, and even killed invaders. The most famous was Tomoe Gozen, who beheaded enemies in battle while riding a horse like a demon. Forget damsels in distress. These women were the danger. They practiced ritual suicide, but not always for honor. You've heard of seppuku, ritual suicide to preserve honor. But not all seppuku was voluntary. Sometimes it was a sentence, a forced punishment. And it wasn't always noble. Sometimes a disgraced samurai was ordered to die just to save face for a superior. So much for honor. The samurai code was made up later. Everyone talks about Bushido, the way of the warrior. But during most of the samurai era, that code didn't even exist. It was romanticized after the fact, especially during the peaceful Edo period. Real samurai didn't always act honorably. They schemed, betrayed, and assassinated. The code came after to rewrite the messy truth. They were obsessed with death poetry. Before committing seppuku, a samurai would write a death poem, usually in 17 syllables, like a haiku. These weren't sad farewells. They were calm, sometimes even ironic. It was about facing death with clarity and style. Imagine dying, and your last words are a mic drop in poetry form. The samurai were erased almost overnight. For over 600 years, samurai ruled Japan. Then came the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s. The new government outlawed swords in public. They stripped samurai of their titles, their privileges, even their identities. Some protested. Some joined the army. Others faded into history. The age of the samurai ended not with a battle, but with paperwork. So the next time you picture a noble samurai, remember, the truth is far more complicated and a lot more interesting. Tag someone who still thinks they were all about honor. They need to hear this.